Here with Mark and Jana this morning in Los Angeles, Venice in particular, to talk about the mental obsession and sobriety and life and love and an absolute state of being and a knowing nature and awareness. And Mark he's got his 60th day today sober and just finished the seventh step. And we were talking about, leading up to the recording, we were talking about the process he went through, which was he'd been left alone by the sponsor who's taking him through the steps and sat by himself for an hour and a half before he decided to actually take the step. So you can fill in there from there, Mark. But I thought as we were talking, this is very good insight for people.
Yeah, I mean, I did my fifth, sixth, and seventh yesterday. And I really got stuck up on the seventh because I was obsessing. I was obsessing with some doubts. And in my sixth step, I got to, God, please remove my self-centeredness. I was able to sort of narrow it down to that. But to actually make this, get on my knees and do my seventh-step prayer, I was just stuck in doubt. And it took me about an hour and a half to get to the point of realizing that my doubt was coming from my obsessive thoughts. And I didn't have to continue down that road with those thoughts.
Yeah.
Once that happened, I was ready to get down on my knees and say my seventh-step prayer.
Well, and what's interesting about the step itself, humbly asked him, he, she, it, whatever that power is, to remove our shortcomings. And you're describing in that doubt, as we've talked about in this discussion so often, you're describing in the doubt your awareness that the thoughts you're having are doubtful. It's not about God. We seem to pin the tail on another donkey than the thing we're doing by making believe God is doubtful and God is questionable when it's our thinking about God or that absolute nature. And we use the word God as a reference to whatever that absolute, infinite, unlimited, omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscience is. Whatever that is, we call God. So it's not a man, I don't suspect. It's not a human, I don't suspect. It's a present conscious nature that is absolutely our nature. Can't be absolute and infinite and not be the source of our nature and experience. So when it says humbly asked, humility is not having things more or less. And the end of the step is humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. A shortcoming is certainly less than a full measure. So the shortcomings and the defects are basically the thoughts we have that are less than we are capable of having, and certainly less than the ideal that we're considering. So that's where the defects come from, these defective characters. You had said you started to notice your self-centeredness, which is one of the primary points of the steps, is to eliminate the self-centeredness, to begin to notice that has been causing the problems. And to think that thinking of itself becomes who we are is a huge leap, and yet has seemed to be historically this psychological disadvantage that we create and impose on our own experience by making believe all we are is what we think. Because as soon as I think my thinking itself creates a self, I think I'm the creator of reality. And now not only does it put me at odds with reality, that I can't be at odds with, by the way, because reality doesn't change, an infinite source doesn't change, but my thinking about it starts to change as I begin to concede the points about the shortcomings I have in relation to my thinking. It gives me a chance to do that. Humility, again, is not having things bigger or smaller, but as they are. And if something already is as it isn't up to me to define it. It just is what it is. As I begin to concede that, it starts to become obvious that the problem has always been sourced in the thinking I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. Self-centered thinking.
Well, and the idea, the bigger idea that there's a self-centered in the thinking. That's the problem. It's really thinking of itself. And so what's centered in thinking about itself? Thinking. So we keep thinking about our thinking and think the self's going to get better because it's an imagination. Bill talks about 100 forms of self-delusion. And I would say, I sat next to somebody last night that's sober for 30 years at a wedding. And I said, he said 100 forms. I said, I probably have identified 1,000 because the potential to attach to ideas that aren't true in the name of trying to perfect the idea that who I am is what I think goes on all the time.
Yeah, I
When I'm
mean,
obsessively thinking.
I'm telling you, like, and I want to go grab. I got to stand up and go grab some stuff in a sec because I want to grab my book and my stuff. But literally, I got into the self-centeredness, and then I told you I grabbed your email, and it was the first line was self-centeredness, and then it was exactly where I was stuck. Thinking about thinking creates more thoughts.
Yes. Yeah. So,
and that was where I was like, "Thank you, Jack."
well, but this is now coming out of exactly what we're learning in the big book and the steps. It's really the essence of it. It's starting to see that we don't create a self, we create more thoughts thinking of themselves. And that's to mire ourselves in that as a stagnation. Yes, it's a vicious cycle. It just goes round and round and round and feels depressing because the seeming weight of it, it's like having a bad dream, and the weight of that dream is so unbearable that we wake up. But in our daydreams, we don't seem to be willing to wake up too quickly to the fact that we're doing it while our eyes are open and still doing it, still causing the nightmare and the haunting effects of that imaginary state. So Mark has stepped away to grab something, but Gabe, good morning. And Jana, again, good morning. The sun is just rising in Hawaii.
It's windy and rainy.
Gabe is just rising in Venice.
Yes.
I really enjoyed the walk yesterday, Gabe. That was there were 4 of us yesterday that walked around the marina and talked in person about this. And it was one of the gentlemen is new, AJ, and he had a lot of good insight and a lot of good questions to be able to bounce off of and to be able to shape and sort of create this holographic discussion. As much as our choice to think about what we think is up to each of us, it's the collective of our conversation that makes the difference for all of us. It's beginning to discuss this openly and beginning to recognize that if we're posing as an image of self and acting on that behalf as an appearance, constantly trying to perfect how we look to other people, rather than start to notice that we have an absolute state of knowing awareness that doesn't look like anything, but is the same present nature that everyone has, then masquerading as an imposter of a self doesn't make a lot of sense. It's really a parade of dunces and false images and likenesses that aren't likable, that aren't useful, aren't helpful. And everyone else's opinion becomes critical to us because our thinking is challenged, and it feels like our life is threatened because we make believe as soon as we think thoughts are reality that we are thoughts. We are now in thoughts. We are not observing thoughts. We are not actually the one choosing the thoughts. Now we are subjected to thoughts as though they are in control. And that's exactly what an addiction is. And the mental addiction is the core addiction to all reactive, impulsive, and compulsive behaviors. Gabe, what were some of the things you were starting to outline? Some of the points that you and I have been working together for a couple of years.
Well, the first one is mind. I had a hard time, or still do, separating mind from thought, mind from thinking, mind from brain.
Yeah.
So that's one of the pillars there. And the other is time, which of course we spoke about yesterday, of concept versus minutia. So, but maybe you could expand on mind and brain. They're not the same.
Well, in a sense they are, but the brain is designed to function in the body it's designed for. And the mind is already, in an absolute sense, it isn't, the mind seems invisible, and yet the visibility of it is the understanding that it's absolute and that it's always available, that it's accessible, that it's not divisible, so it's indivisible, meaning that it's an essence that is indefinable with words. It's not something we're going to ever come to terms with in terms of the words we use to come to terms with things. So to begin to concede that to thinking, now thinking actually operates on the basis that's actual rather than presumed, fantasy, illusion, and starts to function properly, because now it's like a dam with the water flowing through it. If the dam decided that it didn't know there was water there, and because it didn't know, it shouldn't allow it through the gates to charge the generators that produce the energy, that benefit, if there is one, if that benefit of that creation of energy wouldn't exist. And in a sense, when we think all we are is what we think we've blocked reality and truth. We think we're separated from it. We think we're divisible from it. We think we're divided, alone, disconnected. And that is a very fearful place to be when your nature is absolutely connected to everything. And the only reason we fear it is because we know it's wrong. And fear is an indication something's wrong. That's what it's designed to do. It's a good marker that we are aware something is a threat to what we're doing. When we become that threat in our own thinking, there's nothing more primal to our existence. So it's easy to make believe it's all that's going on and all that is happening, but it's all happening within the thought structure, not within reality, not within a mind with a capital M, which is just pure consciousness, pure awareness.
Yeah, I like the capital there. That helps.
And historically, that's what, the I, ironically, if you think about it, God has always had a capital G. Any supreme absolute term is typically capitalized. Mind, absolute, reality, truth, when they're thought of in those absolute terms, they're always capitalized. And we capitalize I, and yet think of it as a small I. We think of that self as something that's a product of thinking of itself. And what thinking about thinking does when we employ thinking to think about thinking, which is contemplation, and there's nothing wrong with contemplation and considering things, it's actually one of the hallmarks of the distinction for humans. Like walking is unique to our capacity physically as a body to humans, and being able to think about our thinking is one of that contemplative advantage is an advantage that we turn into a great liability, undermine the asset potential by depreciating that potential and depreciating our own depreciating our capacity by starting to dysfunction on the basis of thinking that's just simply backward. It isn't aligned with reality. It's attempting to be reality. So that attempt preoccupies it with something that's impossible, and all of a sudden life seems impossible and difficult. And you hear it a lot. It's talked about commonly. Life's complicated. It isn't. Life is not complicated at all. Life has been doing what life does as long as life has been doing anything. It is what it is. It's always been that way. And how things go have never been in contest. They seamlessly occur, and there are no opinions about that. Only our opinions, our thoughts that seem so pervasive. And especially when we're using them incorrectly, and they can seem so gripping because the pain that comes from them seems like it's reality, when in fact it's a byproduct. Pain is also a byproduct of admitting something's wrong. And those are all physical, somatic experiences that are created in our bodies.
Maybe too, Jack, what AJ started talking about was meditate. Do you meditate? Hey, I meditate. I have a 2-hour meditation thing, like you were saying, I meditate all the time. Constant.
I suspect we all are. That observer that's observing, the capital I, far as I can tell, in a capital I sense, is the observer. It's where the wisdom is, the intuition is, because it's absolutely observing from an absolute present state of being. And that isn't an elevated state. That isn't an exceptional state. That's the normal state. To think of it as elevated would be to think of it as grandiose, and again, start to inflate it because we think of it as so extraordinary compared to the depreciated experience we've created, when in fact, that's what nature is. Nature is about healing. It's about creation. It's about innovation. It's about development, function, constantly. I'm watching the palm tree behind Jana in Hawaii. The pineapples that come off of the trees in Hawaii do not stop growing when people stop eating them or start eating them. They're just doing what they're doing while they're doing what they're doing. It's very simple. There's no meaning in it. There's no purpose in it in that regard. It's simply a function they are designed to do, and they do, period. Our basis is that same way. It's unquestionable because there's no doubt or uncertainty in it because it's unquestionable. The doubt and uncertainty comes from the ideas we have, thinking that reality is what we think and truth is what we think. And the best we can seem to come up with is saying that truth equals an accurate description of what happened, what I did, who was there, where we were, what happened. And that can't ever be true because what happens in every moment is everything that's happening. And you can't ever tell that story. You could never, to try to tell that story would take all the time there was. So it shows how flimsy time is in this whole concept. It must be a knowing presence we have now that knows everything, that has certainty, that isn't in doubt, that isn't in question. And I would say that's the observer. If that's the observer, we're watching our thoughts. And the difference between obsessive thinking and actual thinking is that when we're obsessed with our thinking, we think we're in the thoughts, having lost all perspective, and as a result feel blind to what's happening and end up thinking that everything's happening to us rather than being caused by us. As the observer, it's easy to see that that's a pretty debased idea, to make believe that all of a sudden I become a thought simply because I think about my thinking. And to begin to dispel that rumor allows our human functional capacity to begin to wake up and notice that we really were never asleep. We just acted like it because we didn't seem to know what to do. Just seemed perplexing. And insanity is just that thing. So we don't have to travel too far to be insane if we're managing any idea that isn't true as true. We create that conflict and live in that terror and dread and sense of isolation and disconnect and all that. We're not actually living in it, but we're living within the thought structure that suggests that's all we are, is that thought structure. So it's a very small idea compared to reality and truth, because anything infinite has no size and nothing small can ever be part of it. It just doesn't even exist within it. That's a big part of our conversation, is beginning to see that the things we think we struggle with don't even exist. So to think we need to manage them is to give them credit for existing, to have something to manage. To think we have to fight them is to think they exist and can be fought. To think we have to reduce them is to think they have some size and some place, when all they are is a thought presently about a thought we may have once had, but have maintained enough to be thinking about now as though it's real and as though it's true. So the healing is just starting where we are, noticing if I'm feeling it now, I'm doing it now. If I feel disturbed, I'm causing the disturbance now. It's not what I did back then. It's not who did it back then. It's not where it happened back somewhere else. It's now, here, where we are in a human functional capacity. So our job isn't to become better beings. It's to begin to better express in our human capacity our being nature so that we can function as humans to the full capacity we were designed to in terms of cooperation and support and service and love and generosity and all of the things that would go into being abundant in our expression, rather than the scarce thoughts roaming around and crusading as though they are the only thing, and ending up in fights and petty disputes with people over wanting a little more of what they have and wanting to give up a little less of what we have. Constantly being in that constantly living in that environment where we're almost suffocating for air and just hoping we can get another good breath, when in fact the depressed bodies that we end up inhabiting as a result of the depressed thinking don't breathe very well. So it isn't something we're lacking, it's something simply we're not doing fully, we're not expressing fully. Our capacity has been diminished. And that's just the physical human capacity. It's not our actual reality, that capital I. That hasn't been, it can't be diminished because it's not even a spatially bound. It's just, it isn't something that's dimensional.
We talked about stop being human beings and start being human.
I think we were talking about the idea that we say, well, we're only human, to excuse that there's nothing more we can do than the worst thing we're doing. And I suggested that the human being is backward because we're being human. We're beings as humans. Our being nature is human. While we're here, for at least this illusory, whatever this process is that we're in, this experience that we're having, we have a body and we've been given responsibility over that body, which is why we can freely make choices and to think what we want and act the way we want as a result. So beginning to see that the mentally obsessive thinking is the attempt to reverse the natural order of things by claiming we're the creators of reality and need to constantly try to achieve reality, rather than see that we are products of reality, and that we can't achieve it through thinking, not because it isn't achievable, but because we've already achieved it where we are as we are now. Here. It's already done. We're already a product of it. We're in this universe. We are of this universe. It isn't some strange thing that there are distant places that we consider. They are no different than the distant places we consider on our own thinking. The universe is a metaphor for the capacity we have to think. And if our thinking is marginalized and minimized, we're not operating to the full capacity we have to give, to create abundance, to be generous, to have something, to have so much that it would never occur to us to want to keep it. It would just naturally, like putting 10 ounces of water in an 8-ounce glass. The glass doesn't argue with what's going on. It just lets it flow overflow. So that's more of our nature. Good morning, Lenses.
Good morning, Jack.
Glad to see you.
Me too. I am glad to be here.
Thank you.
Yes.
I appreciated your enthusiasm last week, and I suspect that the potential to discuss this collectively can be very inspiring, because it taps into something that we don't have to tap into at all. But when we start expressing it, we're actually expressing what tapping would define as accessing something and beginning to have it sort of fall out of our mouths almost before we realize what we've said. You know, that sort of that intuition very often isn't thinking about what we're doing. We just know what to do and end up doing it. I have found many instances where I thought, wow, that just came out of me. Like,
Yes.
I didn't think about it at all. And that actually had some credence to it. And I was kind of caught off guard. But the idea of being caught off guard sort of shows how defensive we are, that we think when we do anything notable, we're caught off guard. Right? So,
Right.
you know, part of this is just beginning to notice that we've developed, and I suspect it's not each of us, but all of us, because we're intimately connected. I can talk about what I can do as though I do it separately, but in fact, I'm doing it in relation to everyone. And to start talking about everyone as part of this starts to shift the conversation to what we can all do collectively. in a way that includes everyone rather than excludes some as being not wanting to listen and these people and those people and all that kind of stuff. We seem to be perfectly able as humans to know exactly what's wrong with everyone else while we're struggling with issues in our own experience.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So my sense is growing the audience in terms of a conversation. If it's 5 or 6 people, that's a lot different than speaking one-to-one with somebody in an isolated, sound booth where you get comfortable with the person, but don't seem to have that same comfort with all the other people you come across during the day. And back to your point about meditation, Gabe, the thing that struck me was that the meditative times that I used to spend always felt incredible, and I was clearly aware of something profound compared to the thinking I was doing. But then when I'd step out onto the street and begin to interact with people, I seemed to lose that sense of peace and that sense of calm. And I started realizing that I thought it was only there when I meditated, and began to realize, well, I'm always in a state of meditation. And I have a building across the street from where Katie and I live, and we had meetings there in a gallery. We set up a gallery for artists. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, they'd have the gallery, and then we'd do meetings during the week. And one of the guys that ran one of the meetings' father was some Indian guru that taught meditation. And I said to him, aren't we always meditating? He says, that's what my dad says. We're always meditating, because a contemplative state of consciousness is simply an awareness of awareness. And that would be the definition of meditation. So if that's what we're doing all the time, and we're not doing it 24 hours a day in terms of our human functional capacity, then we're misusing, or at least misapplying, the potential we have to start noticing that I must have a lot of wrong ideas about everyone else during the day to be constantly coming up against issues that irritate me and frustrate me and agonize me. So there may be some practice I have to begin to see these people as more than I think they are, and as whole as I think I may be or am, and start to at least approach them on that basis, rather than the one that I presume immediately they're idiots.
Yes.
Or somehow wrong, or somehow I expect they're only going to do this. And when they do it, I say, see, I actually set it up in my own reactive urge to have them do what they do, so that I can use it to justify continuing to do the worst thing I can do rather than the best thing. And let them do things that far exceed what I used to find out in meetings. Was the person in the meeting that I thought the least of would always, whenever they spoke, exceed my expectations. And I started realizing, wow, that's interesting. That must be my inability to even recognize them, that they're overcoming. And that wouldn't be hard for them to do, because I didn't think much of them at all. So of course it would take very little. And then it started to sort of foster this idea that, yes, of course, if it's starting in my own thinking, the problems, then all the problems I'm coming has nothing to do with everybody else, and everything to do with my own lack of experience, or my own lack of wisdom, my own lack of application. And that's a very traumatic way to live, making believe that it doesn't exist.
Exactly.
It's like the brutality of humanity becomes impossible, when in fact my own experience has become impossible, because I'm thinking ideas that aren't true are possible.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. See, meditation is very powerful.
What is that?
Especially meditation.
Yeah.
Like you say, it's so powerful. I believe in that, and talk to myself and meditate about my day, the thing that I have to do, especially my state of mind every morning is so important. To write down, to read.
So the bigger idea is to begin to realize we're always meditating wherever we go. And we're just not very good at having things how they are. So we feel complicated as a result of the ideas we have in relation to them that aren't true. So it sets off all that sense of disturbance that we think isn't meditative because it's not peaceful. But in fact, the peace of our absolute meditative state of mind is what's giving us the potential to recognize the disturbance. If everything was in fact disturbing, including a meditative state, a disturbance would be peaceful to us. It would not be disturbing. Follow me?
Yes.
So
Yes.
that awareness to see suffering and all that is coming from a knowing that's greater. It's a knowing that is, it isn't even greater, it's just real knowing compared to this false idea about knowledge. Thinking what we think is true and what we expect is real. And when I think my thinking is real, I only expect things to happen the way I thought they would when I originally thought of them, which is that things have always happened the way they happen, not the way I thought they should.
Yes.
If the being nature is natural, that's our nature. An absolute state of knowing awareness. Absolute, not in shrift or thrift. In actuality, not delusion. It's just the way it is. And I don't say this to tell you that's the way it is. I suggest it to have you consider it and try it on and wear it and see if your experience doesn't begin to shift a little bit in relation to the thinking you do, and have you begin to observe your thinking as an observer, because I would say that's who we are. We're the observer and we're the chooser. Out of all we have to observe, we allow our body to head in different directions, which means we're responsible for what our body does and what we think. All of it, not some of it, all of it. So if I'm thinking about well, it's ultimately I even think the word power and like the term force is used in relation to spiritual things. It's a powerful force. My sense is it's not powerful or forceful, but it is the nature of existence, which is so unusual compared to the thinking we've done about it, because we've quantified it and defined it in words that sort of add up to the ideas we've had about power. But if our ideas about power have given people who we thought they were in power because they violated our rights and imposed restrictions on our ability to move freely about the cabin, our world, they don't have power. They have a manipulative, divisive, almost violent, if not violent, tendency to try to impose their thinking on us. And we allow that by giving them the impression that there's nothing we can do, that because they have that violent capacity, we can't do anything about it, when in fact we can certainly think about it accurately and begin to realize that expression that has been historic in you're from Argentina, right? Venezuela. Okay, so you had some problems down there historically.
Yes.
Yeah.
A lot. Yeah.
So the idea of dictators and all these people that run around and say they're in charge and they're going to fix everything for the people, they're basically very often, if not always, robbing the people for their own sake by creating an image that they're helping the people, and then brutalizing the people they're helping when they start talking about the fact that they're not helping them. And that has been historic through history. That's coming out of that same thinking. And I'm not suggesting they're wrong. Those people are wrong. I'm suggesting we allow that to happen by not being honest about what's actually happening and thinking that they actually have power, when what they have is a manipulative urge to subject and oppress and kill people because they don't like how they think. We allow that to happen.
Yeah.
Anthony, good morning.
Hey, good morning, guys. Sorry, I slept in.
Glad to hear that. The world was at rest for an extra hour this morning. So, in saying that, it's really addressing the population of humanity to begin to talk in honest terms, because those honest terms would reflect what we all share rather than something we each think that could put us at odds with anyone or everyone. And starting to notice that if this absolute state of being exists, then it is what we share. It's always been the natural source of our experience. And the fact that we haven't acted that way suggests to me that something has been wrong enough, long enough, to be presumed normal when in fact it's abnormal. And to be presumed natural when in fact it's unnatural. And to be presumed healthy when in fact it's unhealthy. Again, you see the reversal Like a lie claims only to be true. It's only a lie as long as the truth is claimed to be what it is. So it's actually claiming to be the only thing it can never be. So what does that take? A lot of energy, a lot of thinking, a lot of defense. That's on each of us when any thought we're maintaining that isn't true is thought to be true. So if we think about that, it would seem, well, that's impossible for me to deal with every one of those thoughts. I don't even know what those thoughts are, but we don't have to do that. We're in a simple reality. Reality doesn't change, so simplicity would be its guide. So what's the solution? Notice the disturbance, just like the big book talks about. Whenever we are disturbed, there's a spiritual axiom. Whenever we are disturbed, something is wrong with us. What's wrong is our thinking. We're thinking about something incorrectly. If we can simply make that blanket connection, then we've resolved all of that thinking, not just the one thought, the individual. We know whenever we're disturbed, something's going on that isn't right. Rather than not right with the world, it's beginning to see it's not right with our own thinking about our own thinking. There's not much we have to offer the world at all when we are stuck thinking our thinking is reality and truth. And the more we think about that reality and truth, the better we'll get. While in fact, it creates more and more defensiveness and more reactiveness and more insistence and more persistence from the resistance and more pressure and more demoralized conditions where all of a sudden the best thing people think they can do is shoot 30 people in a mall. That's a goal. I don't remember anybody thinking about that when we were in high school. What I want to do is grow up and murder a bunch of people with a rifle. And it's become common. Hundreds and hundreds of people in this country have been killed that way. And we're not talking about insanity as being much more common to each of us. In any way we manage these thoughts that are not true, we have an awareness that something is wrong. There's an anxiety that comes with it. Blood, sweat, and tears are evidence that something's wrong. We can think it's a secret, but it is no secret. It is immediately expressed by us in the doubt, the shyness, the reluctance, the anger, the hostility, the spitefulness. All of that stuff that's going on are all indications of an awareness that we know what we're doing while we think we don't know what we're doing. So we have nothing to do with it. So if it isn't true, it isn't true. And if it's inaccurate in any way, it isn't true. So our job as humans, I would suggest, is to figure out if there is anything to figure out or surrender to what's already been figured out and start operating on that absolute basis and know that it isn't something that comes and goes because we feel it comes and goes. The feelings that come and go come from the thoughts that are coming and going. They're not coming from reality. When we are choosing to think for ourselves as though we are distinct from reality, we're creating the environment that gives us the impression we're separate simply from thinking, not from reality. We're just basically violating the knowing nature of our essence by making believe all we are is what we think.
Jack, I want to share something with you important.
Please.
I am so happy because I'm learning how to be aware constantly about my own thinking and thought and figure it out like, okay, this is coming from my brain. This is me talking, but those are not mine. So go away from my head. So I'm focused on controlling my thoughts and controlling what I want. Yes, what I want to hide my brain, what I want to have here, and bye. Yeah, something like that.
So
it's so important.
That's an approach to it, but I'm going to take it a little bit further if I can with you. Okay.
Yes.
Let's just if there's something real, it can be controlled. If you think your thoughts are out of control and all they are thoughts, there is no control to thoughts out of control, because the reason they're out of control is they have no basis in reality. So they're just thought to be real. All they are is you're fantasizing that you're going to control fantasy, when in fact you're going to continue to fantasize that the control of fantasy should be happy and fun and you're in charge, when in fact it turns into a nightmare, like so many fantasies tend to turn into. You know, I can fantasize that I'm eating a meal all day long and starve to death, right? So fantasy isn't reality. And we have the capacity to fantasize because we have the capacity to create and to innovate and to think beyond the experience we're having. Now, when that turns against us, there's something wrong in that formula that's undermining our capacity. So the point I'm making, and it takes a second, took me some time. Speaking of no time, Gabe, but it took some experience to start to notice that I was always only thinking the thoughts were real. So I thought by controlling them, I'd fix them, when in fact, by thinking I could control them, I was acting as though they were real enough to control. Rather than just start to say, if they're delusional, meaning they're illusions, just ideas thought to be reality, just like a mirage. People exhaust all their effort trying to get to the mirage because it's going to provide shade and water, and there is no shade and there is no water there. So what do? They kill themselves getting there. It's the story of Narcissus that I included in this week's announcement. He fell so in love with his image that he didn't eat. He couldn't love people, and other people that he didn't love felt so sorry for never getting his attention, they killed themselves.
Yeah.
So the effects, while they seem real, are simply effects of our thinking, because we're capable in a body to manifest an experience that mimics what we're thinking. It's what our feelings largely are. They're feeling. If you listen to the words that you attach to feelings, the words attached to feelings are thoughts, right? Because feelings don't define themselves. Feelings just feel.
Exactly.
Then we say, I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm this, I'm that. We put the words to it. So the immediacy of that connection is what we call our experience for the most part. So I give that to you just to contemplate, again, in your meditative daily 24-hour-a-day state of awareness, and start noticing that if you can observe your thinking like you're talking about, you're starting to see that you are not the thinking. And that thinking can't be any more than thoughts imagined by a brain that you are asking to imagine things. And when you ask that brain to imagine things you're thinking are reality, you've now asked the brain to be insane.
Ooh.
And that's the responsibility. That's that responsibility. We don't lose responsibility when we act irresponsibly. We are just responsible for the irresponsibility that we create. If we are, in fact, that, then dealing with it accurately and fully and honestly would be the way to resolve it. Even resolve, to me, is a word that's probably not right, because resolution is a constant resolving, which means to me, I haven't solved the problem, so I'm constantly obsessively resolving it to feel better about it. Like you're talking about controlling it. I want to think I'm in control of these things, when in fact, the pen that has the goats and the sheep in it that I'm trying to control is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And pretty soon my fences can't even hold them. And I'm feeling overwhelmed and I have a nervous breakdown trying to keep it all together. There's nothing there. It's all imagery. It's all just quackery.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. And to consider that, to start to notice that if you can watch your thoughts, you can't be your thoughts. The idea that when we think they're real, we think we're in them, and we think we're blind to all other information that we know, that as a result, because it's like an eye can't see itself. So we all of a sudden think, being in our thoughts, we can't see anything but our thoughts. And so all we think it exists is what we're thinking. And that's a pretty narrow view of life. Probably as narrow as you can get. So it's just contemplation. If we can talk about it here, hopefully we can do it elsewhere during the day with everyone. Not to say we need to convince them of what we're thinking, but simply start sharing in ways that would be coming from an awareness that isn't just trying to promote appearances and illusions and delusions, but starting to say, I don't always know what to say. I can be really stuck for words. I would like to say something, but I'm not sure what it is right now. And be with somebody for a moment, letting them know your own doubt and your own uncertainty for a second. And there's clarity, there's healing in that, and clarity in that, and forgiveness in that, and potential in that, and inspiration in that. Because it isn't laden with what you think you should do, or what you think you have to do, or what you think is the only thing you can do. It's now a freedom to say, wow, I'm sensing some things I don't even know how to put words to. And when I hear that from people, I am fascinated by their willingness to stop, to witness, to look, to gaze, to consider. And it's very reassuring to me. And I find it yesterday, Gabe, in the discussion we had, you know, I walked away from it with a sense of confirmation in so many ways, not because of what my participation was, but because I participated with people who were also participating. And all of a sudden it gives me a clarity of seeing we're all doing this together. There's no individuation. There's no separation. There's no me and you. There's us. There's we. We function that way. There are Indian cultures in this country that grew up with languages that were so unique that people 20 and 30 miles from them didn't understand their language. And they lived next to each other for 1,000 years and didn't have the words I or me in their language. It was always we and us. They always thought about the collective. So this isn't a particularly new idea. And if it's our nature, it's been going on as long as we've been unnatural in our thinking. The obsessive thinking has been going on as long as we've been unnatural and thought we could control it and thought the job was to hide the things we were doing so that we could act like we weren't doing the things we were doing and act like we're better than those things, and then wonder why we have this constant dilemma going on inside. Rather than literally dissolving, sort of like evaporation, the water just disappears. It isn't that it's gone. The potential for it to come back is going to be the rain that comes back. But it isn't in the same form. It isn't in the same quantifiable, seemingly calculable, definable shape that we tend to keep it in. So all of a sudden it seems gone, and yet it's always possible to pull back. You don't have to ever worry about having a bad thought or being afraid to let go of a thought. You can always make it up again. But as you begin to realize that there's nothing to hold on to, there's a clarity that my experience says, why would I bother doing that? Knowing the freedom, why would I do that? Why would I choose that? And the only answer I can come up with is because I'm crazy in those moments. I'm not crazy, but I'm willing to choose crazy thoughts to support crazy ideas that I have, almost as camouflage to keep so much going that's wrong that I can give myself the impression there's nothing else I can do but manage these false problems I've created just to keep my attention distracted from what's actually happening. And I would say a lot of our problems and human problems are just that. They're just manufactured, almost a delusional attempt to distract ourselves from the absolute knowing we have, because we can create so much havoc that our attention is paid to it, and we think we don't have any attention left, which I would say is a good definition for attention deficit disorder. If I'm paying attention all the time to what isn't happening, I'm not paying a lot, if any, attention to what is happening. While what is happening is always happening, and what isn't happening is never actually happening. It's only imagined to be happening. We done?
Wasn't that the natural conclusion, is that we can stop talking at some point?
Well, it is an indication of it's either contemplating or hiding. So it's not always easy to know which. I mean, each of us sort of can determine that, but I think the honesty of what we're doing is the chance to start noticing that we can talk about that too together when we're here and when we're there. You know, whatever that place is we go to, whatever those times are that we get to, it's always possible. And that honesty tends to elicit more honesty and freedom from others, because we're not coming at them as defensive, reactive, insistent, demanding humans who want something from them, who only expect a certain result. They're not on guard because we're not approaching them from a point of reactiveness, but peace and knowing and love.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not great at it, but I like to get better. And this conversation, once it expanded into more people, started to actually provide a level of insight that was spectacular compared to what I was getting in the one-on-one, which was great. But as I expanded it and realized that it was really to talk to society is to begin to have a society to talk to, rather than just simply one person at a time. And we can all do this in our own experience, but the perspective we get confirms our experience very quickly, because you notice that the freedom is there, and you notice the benefit is there, and you notice the cooperative potential is there. And it doesn't rely on us to hope it happens and works, because we're witnessing it immediately. And it starts to become more obvious what our own experience is and our own awareness that hasn't always been clear in the haze of this preoccupation of thinking about thinking I need to get there. It starts to become obvious I've always been there. It's not a place I can leave. And yet I can't be condemned to it because it's everything. You can't be condemned to having everything. So addiction suggests it's the only thing we can do and condemns us to doing the wrong thing. Where this gives us the chance to do that wrong thing if we want, and every other possibility, which outnumbers that wrong thing by trillions and trillions to one. So it makes a lot less sense to do those things because we're recovering. Sanity, exactly what the steps are designed to do in relation to any compulsion. Which I suspect anybody who gets sober from alcohol or drugs or sex or food or whatever it is discovers quickly they've got a dozen other compulsions that are gnawing at them. Because the thinking, in my experience, hasn't been addressed directly enough to allow us to start talking in terms that are honest about what we're doing, and notice that we are entertaining a lot of ideas that are absolutely not true. And we are experiencing things that we're embarrassed to talk about because it seems so preposterous to be so depreciated and depressed when we know that there's so much capacity.
Yeah.
But I just suspect that's been a cultural thing that's sort of developed over time. And we think that if like people who repeat the idea that telling a lie more and more makes it true, which suggests that once people start believing it, it becomes true, which means belief has no basis in reality or truth. If the basis of trying to convert a lie into truth is believing in it, then we're believing in something that's unbelievable and have trust in something that has no trust, and faith in something that's faithless. So in reality, you don't have to have a lot of faith to begin to realize there's something real. All that's asked of me is not to fight against it and pretend it isn't there. Because it's just futility that I'm exercising, uselessness, wastefulness. Our brains think, and our mind knows, and our thoughts know our brain, and our mind, and our mind knows our brain. They're not separated. We've just been acting that way to give the distinction that we're separate and alone to support the thoughts that are the non-substantive thoughts that have no basis, as though they're still real, because there's no justification we can come up with that actually ever talks us out of the insanity that we feel like we're in and the embarrassment for it.
I like how you can combine brain and mind into brine.
Brine? Yeah. Salt.
Yeah, you said brine, or you're talking about the brain and the mind.
Well, they're in an infinite reality, everything is the same. Everything is combined. Everything is symmetrical. The fact that we're having an experience that doesn't seem that way doesn't mean that isn't the way things are. It just means that we have bodies that are designed to see things spatially. Our eyes are separated to give us perspective, depth perception. Horses don't have that. Their eyes look out separately in different directions. They have a whole different point of view, per se. But our senses and all that are designed to interact with this environment. So we see it as our bodies are designed to see it. If we then think about it in ways that are untrue, now we're asking our body not to function the way it's designed to function, so we become dysfunctional and desperate and seem to create scarcity to prove that we're right about the thinking, when in fact the thinking is so scarce as not to exist, and we give it credit for even thinking of it as scarce rather than absolutely non-existent.
Okay, can you talk about positive thinking a little bit? Where if you're telling yourself positive thoughts and never saying anything negative, if that's how that work plays out, because that's what every time we'd finish a meeting, and I'd always say, "I got it. This is the way I'm going to look at it, Jack." Every time this happens, and then you would kind of laugh and say, "No, that's just another way of dealing with the stuff." And then at some point, the breakthrough is realizing I don't have to categorize everything. I can just let it happen and not have to try to name it or change it or be mad or sad.
Well, even if you did all those things, whatever it is you were thinking about in relation to all those things you did doesn't change. What happens, happens. I mean, this is almost metaphoric for this idea that there's an absolute knowing awareness that doesn't change, which is why it's simple. If something never changes, that's pretty simple. Right?
But then
there can't be any complications, there can't be any conflicts, there can't be any opposition, there can't be any bits and pieces. It's just always the same. Everything, the smallest part of it would be the whole of it. It would just always, the opposite would be the same. That's a whole different realm than we're talking about when we're talking about the bits and pieces of our thinking. But to the point you're making, Anthony, is we can balance and imbalance, which we do, how we feel about things by teetering and tottering, which we've talked about in here quite a bit. That's one of the possibilities, but it's a job.
Yeah.
It's a thankless job because it never ends, because all we're doing is revealing how flexible our thinking is. So to think that we are stuck with it and what it does is happening to us would be undermined by the fact that we can adjust it simply in thinking about it differently. If we can manipulate this, we were getting into this yesterday. We thought of it as yogic, that thinking is basically what we're talking about is yoga for the mind. Starting to see that if it's flexible, that means it's not inflexible, that the decision to force a point, like hold down the teeter-totter on one side, put 100 pounds on one side, nothing on the other, would be hard to move that other side down by thought, right? So the idea of positive thinking, in the universe, everything is connected. So positive is negative, up is down. If there were no down, there would be no up. If there were no over, there would be no out. Over and out, in and out, up and down, loud, quiet. All of those things are relative to one another. That's what a relative universe is. But to see it as, if I start seeing things as positions I can take, I begin to realize that the capability I have is to take any position because I can think whatever I want. But if I think by doing that it's real, I think I've taken the only position possible, which means there's no other position that can be taken by anyone that doesn't threaten my position. Now here's reality. Reality says that if I take a position, I'm confirming all other positions that can be taken. I'm not taking one to the exception or exclusion of the other ones. I'm actually confirming that every other possibility is possible because I just had the freedom to choose what I chose. That's reality. So within the relative experience, what seems like duality, good and bad and up and down and right and wrong, is all the same thing. Because even if you think of it as good and bad is based on, if something's equally good and equally bad, it isn't either, is it? It's right in the center of the teeter-totter. It's the point that barely moves. But it's based on this idea that good and bad are on a continuum, and the continuum is common ground, and we all, no matter how many positions we take, share that common ground between us. Any position you take confirms that you have a position to take, which is a choice, and it confirms that we all have the right to those choices. And so any choice anyone takes never offends me. It actually confirms me. It actually supports me. It actually is a part of an expression that you have the same freedom I do, and now we're operating symmetrically and seamlessly, rather than this thinking that I can only do what I'm doing, and as a result, you have to do what I'm doing, or it threatens my existence. There again is what thought thinks of that position, because I think it's the only position that can be taken, because I think my thinking is real and there is nothing else but that, and there can be nothing else but that, and my life is at risk if anybody says anything or thinks of anything different than that. It isn't true. That's complete childish behavior. So can you have, I read Power of Positive Thinking by a minister from New York named Norman Vincent Peale when I was in 7th grade. And I thought that was a good idea. And part of it was beginning to realize that people had been mired in misery for so long. They started to realize, oh, you can actually have other thoughts and feel better as a result, right? But since then, he wrote that, I don't remember when, it had to be in the 1910s or 20s. It was kind of an old book when I was young. But we're still teetering and tottering over this depression and anxiety and the struggles and the insanity and the suicide and all that kind of stuff. Still going on. It's going on more now because there's more people to have it going on with. And it may not be just the more people. It may be that because it hasn't been diagnosed accurately, the disease is continuing to grow. And the ideas about it are continuing to be fostered on ideas that are wrong. So it continues to grow and grow and grow. The more ideas people come up with, thinking again, that this is the better idea. This is the new idea. This is the good idea. And in fact, it's feeding the wrong, like any doctor prescribing the wrong medication or diagnosing a disease improperly, and then giving you nothing but a cure for something you don't even have, and wondering why you keep getting worse. And then when you tell him you're getting worse and he denies it, you say, well, you need more medication. I'm going to double the dose, but it's the wrong medication. So prior to Alcoholics Anonymous, there were few options for people who had alcoholism to stop drinking. Think about that. It's 90 years old. Throughout the entirety of history, people have been plagued by that and were killed, jailed, thrown into pits, isolated, sent out of town, not paid attention to. Today, addiction's at an all-time high. Suicide's at an all-time high. So pretty good indications whatever we've been doing hasn't been right. And I'm not blaming and shaming anybody for doing what they're doing, because they've already done what they did. They're not redoing what they did when they did what they did. We are living in a present moment that is the culmination of everything that has ever happened, including everything that's ever been done by anyone who's ever done anything. So we are the recipients of that. We are the inheritors of that. The question is our best step to continue to foster that, or to begin to look at it more accurately and talk about it more accurately and discuss it more honestly and start to function on a basis that is literally capable of transforming the concept of mental health and mental illness and starting to see what it is accurately.
I liked what Anthony brought up about thinking positive thoughts, or, thinking, I forgot exactly how you said it, but it's where my head has been the last little bit, thinking about obsessive positive thoughts. Jack, like we've talked about in the past, like you never see anybody on the street yelling,
Happily.
Crazy great things. Their thoughts aren't like these, like loving thoughts. They're screaming these horrible things because that's what they're, replaying in their head, these horrible things. But, there was a time, even though I just got 60 days, there was, I've had long-term sobriety before.
Yeah.
And I was actually blessed with a 5-year pink cloud at one point. And during those, and I think about that, like during those 5 years, I truly lived in gratitude. And during that time that I was living in true gratitude, my obsessive thoughts were positive thoughts. I kept on replaying positive things. Now, granted, it also, I noticed, which I want to listen to, it's been on the bottom of our email for a while, about near-death experiences and how that changes people, can change people or change people's lives. And I had come out of a near-death experience. And I don't know, I just more thinking of obsessive positive thoughts and gratitude. I don't know where those sort of come into play. It was a little bit of what, I was thinking, and then Lensis, I'm sorry. Thank you. Was, sort of experiencing herself. Like I tell, like she's on a little bit of a pink cloud right now. And she's having obsessive positive thoughts. So, and then Anthony brought it. Thank you for bringing it up and letting me bring it out into this conversation.
So, a couple of points. And again, I'm not challenging your experience, Mark, or anyone. I want to simply offer thoughts to continue to look at what you're thinking in ways that may be insightful for you. And your conclusion of those things will be what you decide, what you think is right. And as you live with the thoughts you think are right, see if it's causing conflict or peace. See if it's causing relief or regret. And here's a point. If you're thinking positive, after years of thinking negative thoughts, Mark, thinking positive thoughts would certainly feel a lot better than thinking more negative thoughts, right? Absolutely. But the idea that you have to think obsessively of positive thoughts tells me you're still thinking obsessively negative thoughts, and you're trying to bring balance to those thoughts. You're confirming those thoughts by trying to get away from them. So one thing that happens, drug addiction is the idea that if I feel better about something, that thing is better. So the idea is if I drink more and I go into oblivion, that problem disappears. Does not disappear. What disappears is my conscious awareness of it in my own experience, my mental brain awareness of it, because I've obliterated my capacity to feel it for a time. Same with drug addiction. It's the same thing. I'm going to feel better. That means the problem's gone. But what am I doing? I'm actually cementing the problem into place by thinking it's real enough to want to feel better than. Just to Lenz's point earlier, I'm thinking of it as something that's real, when in fact, the only depressing thoughts I have are wrong thoughts that I'm fighting for as though they're right. That's depressing to me. Why? Because it creates this inner conflict and this inner turmoil, emotional turmoil, and mental anguish that I think is happening to me because I can't imagine I would ever do this to my own experience. And yet some of the mechanics of thinking that I suspect are simply wrong, like this idea that who we become is what we think when we start thinking about our thinking itself, and all of a sudden the self of thought, which is actually more thought, becomes who we think we are. So we think our life depends on obsessive thoughts, whether they're positive or negative. But certainly if you're always thinking negative thoughts and all of a sudden you start thinking some positive thoughts, you're going to feel better for a minute. But you're going to create a job for yourself because you're going to have to think more and more positive thoughts, because the negative thoughts are going to continue to grow because they're being watered by your opinion that they exist, and they're growing in the soil, and they're going to get bigger, and you're going to have more and more positive thoughts, and those pink clouds pop because they're pink for a reason. They're fantasy. They're imagined reality. They're imagined. Our experience is so much better. We think that's it, but we're the ones creating it, and we're not the creators of reality and truth and peace. We're the benefactors of it. So ultimately, it's the surrender. This idea of self-centeredness has to be smashed at depth, and all that is starting to see there is no self at the center of thought at all. There's just more thoughts, thinking about more thoughts, thinking about more thoughts, thinking about more thoughts themselves. That means the voices, you hear people talk about this a lot, the voices in my head. Think of that. It's not just one other voice. They're not talking to their self. They're talking to multiple personalities in their thinking, because they think every one of those thoughts that they're maintaining has a life. Every one of those thoughts has a reality. And as those thoughts grow, we get more insane and more insane and more insane and think we're in perfect order. That's what insanity is. If you go to a mental hospital,
that gratitude. I'm just thinking back to that long-term gratitude.
Yeah, but where did it end?
Those thoughts during that time, if I can, again, the majority, my thoughts, at least what I was telling myself, or I was experiencing, was my thoughts weren't about me. I always thought so much about me. And when I wasn't thinking about me, and I was just like, I'm gonna be okay no matter what. I had just survived some stuff and had a conscious contact with God for the first time. That like my thought process was not about me for a long time. I don't know. Like I just
Where did it
like to
lead?
talk more about
Where did it lead?
gratitude. And when we are in gratitude, are we? What are we? What are we? Where are we when we're in gratitude?
Where did that 5-year state lead to?
It led to me resting on my laurels because I thought I had reached the pinnacle.
Yeah.
And then eventually I stopped growing.
Okay.
And then eventually I went back to thinking about me.
Yeah. Well, the me you were thinking about wasn't you at all, by the way. It was your thinking about thinking. And I'm not suggesting people can't feel better by thinking better thoughts. I'm suggesting you can absolutely feel better, but it doesn't mean you're not being delusional. Some dreams are happy dreams. Some dreams are horribly not happy. Right? We can witness and we can create delusions of all sorts that give us impressions that seem real and seem like we're happy and we're good and we're thankful. But what we're thankful for, if it's an egoistic driven concept, is that we finally got charge. We're finally in charge. We're finally in control. And when you're talking about resting on your laurels, you think it was reality enough that it's just going to stay that way because you're aware that reality is permanent. It's never going to go away. God, it's been 5 years. Come on. Who am I to? I can handle this. There's nothing there. And what do you find out? It was all, think about the pink cloud. It's a fantasy. I'm not suggesting that the experience isn't valuable and the experience can't be manipulated and that you can't feel better and that you can't feel grateful and all those kind of things. I'm telling you it's absolutely possible. But it's also possible that within that concept, we're still delusional about what's happening because we really haven't given up control. We think we're in control and we think we're the managers of that control. And we think, in fact, we are God creating the peace and the harmony and the gratefulness because we finally got it right. We finally got that lie that we were trying so hard to get right that caused so much trouble right because I feel good for the first time in years.
Ever.
Yeah. Well, and listen, when you align a little bit with reality, like thinking about other people and helping other people, it feels good. Why? Because you're aligned with what's actually happening in the way we're designed. We're designed to thrive, not just survive. We're not designed to break even. We're designed to have surplus and abundance so we can have plenty to give. We don't have any hesitation to give it because we don't want it. We don't need it. More's coming. It's always going to be there. In reality, not in a feigned attempt at thought to manage it.
It was like that analogy you gave with the 8-ounce glass, filling it with 10 ounces of water.
Yeah.
I mean, that was what you just described. That felt like gratitude to me. Like I was that was explaining gratitude to somebody was being an 8-ounce glass and having 10 ounces of water.
So think about during a time when we're drinking and using drugs and think that's the only solution. We think we got control. We think that's it. We got it figured out. We just generally need more of whatever we're doing. It never seems to be quite enough. Like if I run out of cocaine, I'm not generally thinking about when I run out. I'm thinking when I get it, I know it's going to run out quickly. And I'm wondering I'm immediately while I have it, wondering where I'm going to get the next bit. Immediately. I don't wait. And I can get more and think, oh, that's going to satisfy me. But no, I know that more is going to go quickly. It's going to be gone really fast. And I got to come up with a new scheme to get the next batch. It's the same with the thinking. I'm constantly fueling the thinking my denial is finally winning until I concede that the nature of my existence is the nature of your existence and all of our existence. And it doesn't change and it doesn't come and go. And it isn't optional and it's not negotiable. It isn't because I think it's that way. It's that way regardless of what I think. And all of a sudden there's a sort of pop to say, oh, it's only what I'm thinking that's giving me all these impressions that I think I have control over. And I think I got it finally, rather than start to see that I am deficient in 1,000 ways I never saw before I finally conceded that I haven't been very good at functioning my whole life. including in sobriety. I learned how to deal with that by simply admitting I had no power over it. But I was really admitting that the lie I was telling had no power, that it had no basis. It seemed to have power because I kept maintaining it in my own thinking, and I thought I gave it power, just like the guys who think they're in power. But it was an indication of my own weakness and my own vulnerability to make believe that my overpowering my experience was, in fact, real control rather than this just manufactured, constant, manic, obsessive need. Because you were talking about obsessive negative thoughts and obsessive positive thoughts. Obsessive negative thoughts are obsessively denying positivity. And obsessive positive thoughts are obsessively denying negativity. And the difference with positing, you know, the term posit, to posit something, it's kind of like to propose something. It's to let me look it up really quickly, because it's interesting. With negativity tends to negate things. What is that? They're not happening. I can be negative by making believe that thing isn't happening. But what positively happens when I negate something is I start having stress and anxiety because I know I'm doing something that isn't right and isn't real and isn't true. So to posit something is to assume as a fact or principle, right? So that's the basis of positive. What is positive? Doing what we can to actually acknowledge what exists, aligning our thoughts with principles. That isn't, if I'm aligning my thought with a principle, I don't need to be obsessive at all. I'm inspired because I know that I'm free from having to ever think about it, because I know that whenever I think about it, I know exactly how it works. I don't have to wonder how it works because it's not based on my thinking that's changing all the time. I know if I drop something, it's going to fall. I can confidently do that 1,000,000 times, and it doesn't give me any more information the 1,000,000th time than the first time. But in that obsessive cycle, I'm constantly manicuring and trying to get that thinking, and you'll notice it in your own experience when you're constantly thinking about it and you feel at risk or threatening in any way, or constantly need to stay in that state that keeps you kind of like your head's above water and I'm not drowning. While your whole body, you're about 3 inches away from the potential. You're treading water. It's 100 feet deep, and if you don't keep treading, you're not going to last. And that thinking doesn't always occur to us because, as you said, if you've been thinking obsessively negative thoughts for a long time, you feel a lot better thinking positive thoughts. Doesn't mean it's resolved. It means you basically put some weight on the other side of the teeter-totter and it's more imbalanced. So you feel balanced because you're thinking in balanced terms. So I would say
living in gratitude could be living in balance.
Well, it's certainly something to be grateful for compared to the misery, and trying to be grateful for the misery is a bit of a trick. But as you start seeing what we're talking about clearly, you're going to be thankful and grateful for that misery because you're going to see that your body is perfectly attuned to provide you the information you need to know what you're doing when you don't think you're doing it. Wisely attuned, brilliantly attuned. And you'll be thankful for those things and grateful because the fullness of greatness will have been recognized as something that you are a product of, and you can't escape, and you can't let go of, and it can't let go of you because it's infinite in nature. It's not something that comes and goes. It can't be bigger or smaller. It just is as it is now for all of us. This concept, and it's a concept to thinking because it's just something we can consider. But reality isn't a concept, it's simply reality. But it's so vast in comparison to our thinking, it seems preposterous to ever think we can consider it. Which is probably true. We can't consider it. But we can consider we can't consider it and still consider that it's still absolutely real. And start to let go of the thinking that's attached to it and keeps thinking we need to bind it up with the words we use rather than just begin to say, oh, I'm already perfectly designed. I'm already inherently whole, complete, full. And now as I settle in that, the meditative state becomes very obvious because I start looking at things that I thought I was oblivious to and begin to realize I've been looking at them as though they weren't even there. And start to be conscientious of other people and more compassionate and understand things a little better. Not in some fake, I'm going to tell you that everything's going to be okay because I pat you on the back and buy you lunch and send you off on your way, when you haven't learned anything or seen anything any differently. And you're basically you're hurtling at 100 miles an hour toward the earth, ready to crash. That's not the kind of help I'm talking about. I'm talking about actually seeing that honesty, which isn't always welcome and can feel brutal, because it often touches the brutality that people are actually promoting in their own experience that they don't even notice they're promoting or don't want to admit they're promoting. And it seems to hurt, but if it's hurting when you mention a word, think about what a word is. It's completely invisible. It's vapor. It's a resonance of sound. And we think people can hurt our feelings with words. Even in kindergarten, I remember them saying, sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never hurt me. I was 4 when they came up with that. and I'm now 68, still struggling with that. The fact is, if we're hurting and somebody approaches that, it's going to hurt. That isn't doing damage to somebody. That's giving them the chance to actually begin to concede, to reckon with the experience they're having, and start to notice that they do not have to live that way and think they need to keep it a secret or think they need to do something about it to pretend it isn't there. Just begin to be honest about it and say, wow, I must be up to 100 things that I don't even think I'm doing to be feeling that much misery, to be feeling that reactive, to be feeling that judgmental about people. It's not the judgment about people. It's when I think I'm right, that I hold them in contempt for the thing I think they're doing because I'm positive that's what they're doing. There's nothing to do with them, everything to do with what I'm thinking and how I'm thinking. So if there's a challenge here, it isn't reality and truth. It isn't an infinite state, because we've all been that essence as long as we've existed, which would be, since it has no beginning or end, it isn't even in time. We're talking about something that breaks all the boundaries of what we think we're here to do as humans. What we're struggling with are our thoughts about reality, our thoughts about truth. That's all. And as a result, everything we see, everything we think. So the dispelling of those rumors, in my experience, gives people a chance to start, and I've witnessed this with guys I've worked with over the years, as they start becoming aware, they start saying things they can't even believe they've said, because it didn't require belief for them to begin to admit what they absolutely have always known. And they start speaking in terms that are exceptional, and they're actually impressed by what they've said, but simultaneously, Mark, they're humbled by the fact that they know they did not come up with that from their thinking. It was coming from something much greater, much more actually powerful than their thinking. It was a sense of knowing now being expressed in their thinking. And so their gratefulness is, I didn't do this alone. I am a part of something that is vast and full and great and absolute. It isn't optional. It isn't negotiable. It isn't something that comes and goes. It can't be more or less. It's just an absolute state of being. And that is a moment. And every moment. Carl Jung said that his experience, and Carl Jung was very influential with Bill Wilson, he said through history, people who have recovered from alcoholism and other addictions, I'm sure, had vital spiritual experiences, right? Some of those near-death experience things that I studied for during COVID, and not only near-death experiences, because there's two types. People either die unexpectedly or they die with the perspective that they're dying. And the Dr. Christopher Kerr has sat with 1,000 people as they've died. And he said every one of them, as he watches them, goes through a process of beginning to account for their own experience in their own life, their own life's experience as a human. And he says it's like justice. You know how we think of God waiting to be condemned? We're going to be condemned by somebody that looks at our life. He's telling us this is being done by the people. Their awareness gets to the point that they start telling the people who are sitting next to their hospital bed crying because they see them dying that they're perfectly okay. They don't need to cry for them at all because they know that they're fine. They know who they are is not the body, that they're doing what bodies do. They're transitioning, transforming, disintegrating, literally, not as some strange thing and hateful, spiteful, just a natural part of this experience we're having. Because our essence isn't threatened by that at all. And that awareness couldn't be so clear if we didn't have it.
So I lost my brother a year ago in a very short period, and I was by his bedside for the last 2 weeks of his life. And I thought, and he was in constant fear he was in a lot of fear.
Yeah.
And really like couldn't close his eyes and always, but refused to look at the monitor. Like we needed to know he was on a respirator, and he was whatever. It was a horrible experience. And for 2 weeks straight, like he kept on like every 30 seconds needing to know his numbers. And in the last 24 hours of his life, I even said to him, I was like, BJ, I wish I could take some of your fear. And he literally said to me, he said, no fear. And he passed the next day. So just in what you were talking, I mean, you just walked me through that experience again.
Yeah. So you're saying that as he got closer, he had a clarity that was, yeah. One of my sponsors died at West LA. He was at the VA, and he was a complete atheist. He couldn't believe that any God could allow what happens on this planet. And he had seen some things from within the US intelligence community that told him that what he thought was the government being a good bunch of guys was a pretty sick, deviant group of characters that it literally caused him great harm for the rest of his life. I also think he had a horrible situation with his father who beat him and all kinds of things. But his wife said that as he got closer, he sat up in bed, looked up at the sky as though it was a sky. He was in a hospital bed, and his mouth opened wide, his eyes opened like he was seeing something he had never expected, and he died. So that here's my question about that, and the reason I bring it up. So some of the people also that Dr. Chris Kerr sits with, he's sitting with them in a process that he makes very deliberate to help them, I'm sure. To have somebody sit there and talk to them from the point of view of knowing what they're going through and having done it with others, and talk from a medical perspective is probably very reassuring to people's experience, so they can start opening up to what's happening rather than be stuck in the sort of collision of all their thoughts about what's happening. But in his instances, he sees that as justice. In the other instances where people face their justice, and it may be that his influence on that really helps people prepare for this. And I think that's what he does in his life. That's what he saw was so valuable. He wanted to be a cardiac surgeon. And he decided to do this because he said, this is where the value is. I want to do this with people. The other link, Bruce Grayson, I think University of Virginia, is the longest running researcher of near-death experiences, which is where people are caught off guard by the experiences, but yet survive and have an incredible sense of awareness during that period. So much so that some of them tell the doctors what they were doing in the surgery, some of them having hearts removed from their bodies during surgery, and they're aware of the whole thing and the conversation, and they remember every single move from all of it. So my question is, are we so afraid of life because we know to admit truth and reality would dispel all of the rumors we maintain about who we think we are, so that we're not actually living life? We are scared to death of actually living life. We're not afraid of death. We're actually begging for death to finally put us out of the misery that we've been maintaining, making believe that somehow or another death will end it, when it won't. If there's an infinite source, it's not going to. All we're doing is killing our bodies in the name of thinking we're going to get better. And it's exactly what compulsions do. Every compulsion we have is a suicidal tendency and a death wish, because none of them are good for us. Not one of them. Look at the attachments you have, like the guys you talked about on the street, Mark. They never scream out, I love you. Everything's wonderful. Look at the sky. It's always some bitter hatred going on inside their experience of desperation and fear, caustic. My sense is we're afraid to live. We're not afraid to die. Do we need to wait till death and that final moment to confront it? I would say no. If we talk about it honestly, we can start living with the clarity that people are dying with and still have the vitality of a body to express that life we become accountable for and begun to account for in our own thinking and start to express it in ways that provide the abundance, that solve the problems that seem so intractable and seem so impossible right now, socially. All of them, not some of them, start to act like species act around the world. Very few species kill their own species. Some rodents do. There are some, some of them do. It's very rare. If we're intelligent, it isn't intelligent to think the best thing we can do is kill other people for the sake of their thinking. That is a very underdeveloped concept. It's very much kindergarten, junior high, or elementary school mentality. I was here first. You can't talk to me that way. I know you are, but what am I? All that kind of stuff. It's juvenile, childish, immature. And immature fruit is never sweet. And people that grow older do not tend to get sweeter. They tend to get bitter. So it must be something connected to an immaturity. And I think one of the stories in the big book says that we're hypersensitive, emotionally immature, and grandiose as alcoholics. Well, if the core of the alcoholism is a mental problem, just like with drug addiction and sex and food and gambling and all of the other 100 and some programs that are out there plus, then perhaps we could mature mentally by starting to talk about things in honest terms rather than in these prefabricated concepts that we keep spinning over and over and over again, thinking someday the stories about our life and our thoughts will be true, and just start to literally dissolve into an essence that's not dissolvable because there's no problems in it. It isn't a solution because there are no problems in it. Very different realm to notice and to be aware of.
So how about if you take an actual thought? Like one of the thoughts that goes through my head is, God, I should be so much more successful than I am. Or what if I would have done something differently? Think about how great I could have been.
Well, you think your life is based on your thinking, Anthony. So you think something that can't be changed would make you greater than the greatness that you can't be any less than now.
Yeah.
So think about that thinking. If the essence we're talking about is the totality of everything, can you be greater than that?
What happens to that extra 2 ounces of water?
It all evaporates. All 10 ounces.
It's about trying to catch that extra 2. If I just had that extra 2 ounces of water.
That's just a thought, Anthony. And I would say it's a deficient thought relative to this conversation.
Yeah, I guess maybe if you just accept, like, hey, it's a good thing that you don't have everything that you always wanted and that you didn't do everything possible.
You know what's beautiful?
I think
You don't have to accept reality for it to be real. You can define it. You can defy it and be insane in relation to it as long as you choose.
Just think about how much more stuff you have to get now because you don't have everything. It's so available to get more now.
We've got it all. We've been given it all. We share it all. It is everywhere we go, and we already have it. What we do with it tends to be directly related to our accountability for our own actions. And the responsibility we have, which is accountability and responsibility, they're pretty much the same thing, like honesty, allows us to have more because people who tend to be responsible with reality tend to have greater influence in reality, tends to come to them magnetically, just like the problems tend to come to people who are irresponsible, and the pain and the woe and the agony and the failures. Those aren't accidents. They're manifestations giving us an idea of how well. It's like a sailor that thinks his ship isn't leaking while his ship is leaking. He's going to sink that boat. He doesn't have to think that it's leaking for it to be leaking, and he doesn't have it leaking. He doesn't have to think because he's not thinking that it's not leaking. But if it's a choice and he acts as though it's not happening while it's happening, it's no different than any of us making believe our thoughts are true and real, when all of a sudden we also start struggling with real reality and truth, like the actual reality and truth. It's not a coincidence. It's a manifestation of our own mental incapacity to be honest and to think of things accurately and to start aligning. Intuition is knowledge beyond reason. It means wisdom. Intuition is wisdom, as a knowing sense, isn't a thinking process. It isn't an understanding process. It isn't a process of reason and logic. It's a knowing we know, period. Why do we know? We know. How do we know? We know. What do we know? We know, period. There's no justification. It isn't, well, I did this in my experience. I lived this way and did that, and I found this, that's just story about our experience. Reality doesn't change. It's just real, period. When you think you're struggling, just begin to consider that your reality isn't struggling at all. Your essence is not struggling at all. What's struggling are your thoughts in relation to reality. That's it. And to start seeing it that way as the observer, as you already are, your choices will change dramatically in relation to the posing you've asked your thoughts to do as reality. We've been asking our thoughts to mimic reality rather than express reality, which is what they're designed to do. So we get very concerned about appearance when we're trying to look like we're doing something right, when in fact the thing that looks right isn't right, or it wouldn't need to look right to be right. It doesn't need to have an appearance to be right. We can have a thought that's absolutely right and never expressed. So to express our thoughts as appearance is to suggest we're trying to make things look differently than we're actually having them. And to be concerned about what other people think comes with that pretty quickly. You can't talk to me that way. You can't say those things. You hurt my feelings. You're toxic. Stay away from me. We would never be threatened by what we call toxic people if we weren't toxic in our own thinking. If we didn't have our own vapors that somebody could light a match and explode, that would be, none of that conversation would exist. It's all just make-believe, pretense.
That conversation of what happens to the 2 ounces and all this is just bringing me back to a thing of thinking that my God or my higher power, let's say, isn't big enough for me and you. I think I'm downsizing my higher power. That's just something.
You're thinking of it spatially. The brain is designed to think spatially. The mind doesn't think spatially at all because it's not in time or space. Reality is not in time and space. This is a conceptual experience we're having based on a body that we've been somehow given, that we're responsible for. All of our senses are experience. The raw data that your senses provide your brain are not concluding anything. They're providing it raw data. Something gets too hot, it's your brain that says this is too hot. It's not your hand isn't saying, wow, you're burning me. All the pain in our body is registered in our brain. The same place where we can create the pain because we're thinking painful thoughts and experience the pain and think the thoughts must be real because the experience feels so real. And yet it's simply a thought causing it, just like a dream when you think you're being chased or you're being drowned or you're falling. Those are all just imaginations with the exact same physical somatic experience coming as a result of it, because we're aware of what those conditions would cause if they were actually happening. So to think of them as real, why would we wake up from the dream quickly to stop it if we thought there was nothing we could do but continue to maintain it? So one of the questions here is, why don't we wake up during our daydreams a little quicker? and start to realize that it's all self-imposed, it's all self-induced, it's all simply thinking about thinking that's causing this illustrative narrative in our experience that we keep adding to as though it's real. And it seems like because it's growing, it's more and more, but we're growing it, we're fostering it, we're entertaining it as though it's reality. So the talking about it gives us each a chance to begin to notice the thoughts that come up in relation to what you hear. Some will be reactive, some will be responsive, some will be neither, just contemplative. Just like, what does that even mean? What do I do with that? And my experience is when I'm in those places, I'm really beginning to look at things honestly rather than conclude that I already know what they are. I'm starting to actually engage in that meditative opportunity that I'm always in, but don't always take advantage of, don't always allow to express to the fullest potential of that awareness. So I can live with it and say, oh, I'm going to try this thought on. I'm going to let it float. I'm going to see if it fits. If I don't get any calluses from it, I'm probably not rubbing up against it the wrong way.
I have a question. How can addictions to trick the brain or trigger the brain on those negative thoughts that some people have? How addictions, alcohol, drugs, can trigger the brain with obsessive negative thought? I would love to know about it.
Well, if you have an idea that something that isn't real is real, you're asking your thinking to create reality out of something that doesn't exist.
It's a lie.
Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly. So that, lenses, is the basis of all compulsive actions. And what the compulsive actions are trying to do is feel better about the misery you're creating mentally. So what do? We act out. Think of the words we use. We act out of order. What's the disorder? We think a lie becomes truth. There's no order in that. It's complete conflict. It's insanity to even imagine it can happen. So to continue to maintain it means we're insane. So what are we doing? Creating a complete world of our own making that isn't even the world that's already been made. It's complete fantasy and delusion. So compulsions, my experience is reactiveness is an automatic defense. We've gotten used to just automatically bouncing off of things because we're protecting things for so long. So many years and years and years, we've been protecting things. We're defensive. So reactivity is the first notice. Second is impulsivity. Feeling like we have to do something. We've got to go somewhere. We've got to get up. I can't sit still. I got to go. Third thing is the compulsive action. Now I found the thing I want to go do, and now what I need to do is more and more and more of it. I need to have more cookies. I need to have more sugar. I need to have more, whatever it is that kills me, I need more of, because I'm slowly thinking I'm going to kill the thinking, the self of the thinking, because I think it's who I am, not something I'm doing. When I'm witnessing it as the observer, I see this is something I'm doing. I'm having a thought. I'm asking my brain to do what it can't do, which is to create reality, because my brain is designed to express reality, because reality is already created. It's already the fullness and wholeness of everything, everywhere. That's always, it's not even everywhere. It's everywhere beyond everything and everything within everything. And it's a realm that is impossible to describe. And yet we can talk about it in general enough terms to start to say it's so vast. And so it's not even vast because it's immediate. And if it's immediate, it's the present state of our knowing right now, where we are always. And if I'm thinking anything that gives me the impression I don't belong where I am, I'm thinking thoughts that have no basis, which my brain then thinks I must need to be somewhere else. So what am I trying to do? Always get somewhere else. Always try to get there. Always try to have that. Always try to have more. Always try to have them. Rather than, I already got it. It's here. The presence is different. When I say vast, even that misdescribes the universe seems vast. I would say it's not. It just seems that way. It's a projected image of this capacity that we have to consider things that are infinite, because we're made out of that. We're our cellular structure, the whole basis of the atomic potential of our universe is made out of the essence of essence, whatever that is. And I would say if it's absolute, those are great words because they don't have exceptions to them. You can't, to think that absolute isn't absolute is not to think of what's absolute. It's to think of what you're thinking about what's absolute. And it becomes pretty apparent thinking's the problem. And it isn't thinking that's the problem. It's my misuse of it. It's my mistaken ideas. When I make mistakes in thinking, I create misgivings. So mistakes create misgivings. I feel wrong. I feel bad. I feel upside down. I feel out of sorts. I feel displaced. I feel alone. I feel disconnected. All those are consequences of thought. Why? I'm feeling my thinking. If a thought has no basis, it's like a fraction with a zero at the bottom. The numerator can be trillions and trillions of numbers long, and it's still zero. Zero sort of is our almost metaphoric aspect of mathematics to show the infinite source can be reduced to absolutely nothing like that. Because the essence of all the things we think are everything are just projections of possibilities. They're illusory in a sense, which is why bodies decompress and decompose and are constantly changing. Our body cellular structure changes every year or two. Our skin changes, our eyes, everything changes, different time periods, typically because it takes a different amount of time to change. Time is basically just change. But it's a concept. Animals don't struggle with time. They don't wear watches. They don't show up late or early. They're always on time. There's no schedule. There's no calendar. There's none of these manufactured things that we live within. It's not to suggest we can't have them, shouldn't have them, don't have them, would be better without them. Just noticing the things we do, choose. They're not reality. They're not truth. They're just things we've chosen to do. They might help with planning and organizing and all that kind of stuff. But if you think of that, Lensis, as a lie, if we are based in reality and truth, a lie would be repulsive to our nature. What is repulsivity? Reactivity. We're trying to get away from it. We're trying to get away. Rather than admit we're lying, we think we're going to get away from it by thinking the lie is real and true. We kind of fall for the joke.
And so for people who have addiction, for them is a escape. It's like an escape, right?
Well, it's a fake escape because they're actually not escaping because they're doing something that has nothing to do with the thought, but reaffirm that they think they're not having the thought because they feel better. The thing that's the problem grows. So they think they're escaping, but they're actually managing the problem, so it's getting bigger. But it's not just people with compulsions. It's you and I who aren't exercising those kind of compulsions, who have any thought that isn't true, and we base our actions on it as though it's truth. And I'm not suggesting we're going to eliminate all those or stop, but if you start noticing the discontent and the irritability and the restlessness and the struggle and the anxiety are all bodily sensations telling us that we're doing that. That thing we're doing is wrong. They're giving us, our body's putting us on notice that something's going on that is putting it at risk. The same way that if we drank poison, our body would start to create things to try to deal with it. Can't always overcome it, but it would start to work in favor of trying, like we cut ourselves, it heals. You ever notice how beautifully skin replaces itself? It knows exactly what to do with that. It doesn't sit around and say, well, we're not going to deal with that bloody thing. I'm tired. I'm not doing. The body works the way the body works. It tells us accurate information about what we're thinking and what our environment is doing in relation to our thinking. So to think of it as something to get away from is to not take advantage of this incredibly complex computer system that can't be competed with by any other computer system on Earth. And we're fascinated by computing and artificial intelligence and don't notice that the idea that I can turn a lie into truth is artificial intelligence. It's completely artificial and it's not intelligent.
Mm-hmm.
So the lie is at the root of it. And a lie has no basis. If a lie is only a lie as long as it claims to be only the opposite. Remember we talked about duality earlier?
Mm-hmm.
That's both ends are the same. But a lie isn't both ends. A lie is only claiming to be what it can't be, which is truth. Again, it's the same position that I can take when I think my position is true. It's the only position I can take. And as a result, anybody who doesn't take my position is an enemy. It's the same thing. So the lie basically is asking us to believe that all it is what it can't be. And if all it is what it can't be, period. It doesn't exist except in the thinking we do. Lies don't exist outside of brains, nor do egos. I would say time and space is questionable because in an infinite state, there's no space, there's no time in it at all. There's nowhere to go. There's only everywhere to be where we are now. It's
Jack,
in human terms. Yeah.
yes. How we can rescue a brain who is triggered because of addictions? How is something there that those people could do to rescue their brain and bring balance? Because the brain is triggered with a lot of fantasies and non-real thought. And yeah.
Well, I would hope that's what we're doing here. And if we're talking about it honestly, we're giving people, that's what we were talking about earlier, is the idea of talking about this with others isn't telling them anything, but sharing our own experience. If there's any kernels of reality in what we're talking about that can be discussed in ways that approach or aim to that sense of knowing that people have, they'll know very quickly that they're witnessing something they're not used to, and it feels a lot better than what they're normally used to witnessing. And that awareness, I hear a lot when I talk about this from people in meetings and that said, I didn't understand what you were saying, but I felt something was right. And I said, well, that's your knowing awareness. Your knowing awareness feels right when you're willing to admit you're aware of your awareness. It feels right. When you think you're not aware of your awareness and all you are is thoughts, you feel as though you're not aware. Doesn't mean you're not aware. We're always aware because that awareness isn't in thinking, it's in knowing. It's an absolute state of being. It's in the essence of essence that is the reality of this universe and truth. So my sense is what we each do, just like in sobriety, if I stay sober and I work with people by sharing with them the steps I took to help them, and I don't tend to work with them in the way most people work with them. I have them go somewhere that they can do the steps in 4 or 5 hours and get them done. And then we talk about principles, because principles are effectively the metaphor for the absolute and truth, because they don't change. Like honesty isn't dishonest, surprisingly, right? And humility isn't more or less. It's just as things are. It's allowing things to be. Those are the basic fundamental building blocks of our potential for functional capacity that are absolutely inherent. If we do something that's related to reality, we're going to be confirmed in what we do because we're going to get a response that's accurate and fulfilling and valuable and beneficial. Making the bed can be as simple as that. You see the effort you put forth puts the bed back together. Sweeping a sidewalk, doing the simplest things. I had a kid come to me once who was completely out of his mind. He'd come in and out of sobriety for 15 years, loved cocaine, had a drug dealer after him to kill him because he wouldn't pay him the money, didn't have it. He in that building we had across the street, we bought a bunch of used wedding chairs for everybody to sit in. And he called me and he said, I said, come on over. I got something for you to do. And he said, great.
Yeah.
And he cleaned all the chairs. I said, here's a warm bucket. Here's clean water. Here's a mop or a sponge. Clean all the chairs and dry them off. And we're getting these ready for asses who are going to sit in them. And I left him for an hour and a half or so when he was cleaning. And I came back and he said, I feel great. And he said, I don't understand what happened. I said, you're doing something. You're actually doing something that's actually being done rather than thinking about it, wondering about it, hoping about it, and wishing about it, and wanting about it. You're doing it. The simplest action confirms we're capable of function. And if you build on that and start noticing that, that's actually how we're designed to express ourselves, functional manners. So if we think we have no influence, we generally are thinking about thoughts that have no basis in reality, and we keep repeating them. And first of all, nobody's going to want much to do with us when we're not actually able to produce any product, but drag them down unless they're looking for somebody to be worse than they are so they can feel better. So when we start functioning, we tend to be with people that are functioning and starting to develop, and you build an influence, the capacity we have to develop abundance, literally produce abundance. So we all have more to give, and it's easier to give because we're not at so much risk as a result of being isolated in these thoughts we have about being alone and disconnected and so forth.
So people who use cocaine, they are looking for happiness, right? A meeting of happiness. They are looking for happiness. They want to feel happiness because cocaine tricks the hormone of happiness in the brain, right?
Well, I think your first word was better. They want to escape their experience.
Oh, I got
any
it.
kind of alteration, because cocaine has one effect, Valium has another effect. There's all kinds of effects you can create. But effectively, because the lie of your thinking is what's causing the misery, the thing you're going to do is just going to be another lie. So you think if you can manipulate the feeling, you're manipulating the effect now. The effect is I'm miserable, I need to feel better. So you're manipulating the effect. What are you doing with the cause? Maintaining it. Again, it's going to get worse because we're learning to treat the effect. We have treated the effect in this country in terms of drug addiction for years. We give people drugs to get over it. Methadone. If you're a heroin addict, take methadone. You get addicted to methadone. That's better than heroin, apparently, largely because people don't have to go out and steal to buy the heroin. So it's better socially that you just give it to them and let them use it. But they're still addicts, right? If people are dealing with pain medication, when the pain they're trying to heal is being generated by the thinking they're doing that's not right and real.
Physically, it puts dopamine in between the synapses. So all of a sudden the circuits are all connected.
Well, and it also wears that dopamine out that's generally held by the body in storage for when we need it. And when we actually then need it, it's not there.
It gives you an extra 2 ounces of dopamine, Lindsay.
But we're using our chemical factory in our own bodies that are perfectly capable of developing chemicals that would make us feel much better than any of the drugs we do, because they're sustainable and they're unique to our own body. And we're so depreciated in our physical, we have breath. There's a couple doors down, they have breath work classes and yoga and all that. And I said to the girl, isn't it odd that we're the only species that need to be taught to breathe? But it comes from our posture being bad, from kind of hunching over and being depressed and being kind of depleted. We're atrophied in a sense. We're asking our bodies to do what they can't do, and they start wearing that weight and start diminishing their capacity to offer a return for their effort. Exhaustion's common. All kinds of things that seem to be, if you look at a lot of diagnoses, they almost all have, for diseases, they almost all have the same thing. Exhaustion, sleepiness, memory loss, all kinds of stuff that would be related to mental issues.
Yeah. Wow.
So if the compulsions are all coming out of the mental issue, and the mental issue is similar, we're all built on the same platform effectively. We have DNA, we have a structure, we have certain traits that may be unique to us in some way or another, but basically they're evolving. If they work, they tend to grow. If they don't work, they don't tend to grow. When we're imposing on our bodily system insanity as an experience, our body starts to create things that are imagined to be needed for something that doesn't exist. We're actually beginning to break the whole DNA down that would normally be evolving in a direction of helping us get healthier and healthier and healthier, and allergies are caused to all sorts of things that all of a sudden we have abnormal reactions to those things. Those are fundamental to the things we tend to use in compulsions. Allergies. What's the allergy say? I can't do anything with this. It doesn't work for my body. What I need is more.
Mm.
So the person who's drinking says, what I need is the next drink. I don't need to stop. I need the next drink. It's an abnormal, it's twisted. The same thing about a lie. It's backwards. All the thinking is backwards. It's all a reversal of order. And it isn't, that's why we're disordered and out of control. We talk about the terms accurately and don't realize that we're actually describing what we're doing and thinking. So we have anxious disorders, metabolic disorders, nervous disorders, all that kind of stuff, because our body is under this weight that it's not designed to bear. And yet it's designed to bear it in a way that gets our attention so we can say, oh, I'm causing this. I'm the cause of this. My choice to act on these thoughts is the cause of this. This doesn't happen to me. It's my own impulse to ask my brain to do what it can't do, that it constantly feels overwhelmed and stressed and unable to function.
Exactly.
It's my choice to have that happen. So it comes back to responsibility. If there's an absolute nature that's responsible for all existence, and we're part of that existence, we are naturally absolutely responsible for everything we do. So when we act irresponsibly by thinking irresponsibly, it's not something we can't do. It's something we're responsible for doing.
Let me ask you a question, Lindsay. Do you think it's possible to become more spiritual? If you're a certain amount of spiritual, can you become more spiritual person?
What do you think?
Yeah,
Ann?
we can. Yes, we can, because we are a spirit. We are a spirit living in a body. Yes,
Because somebody
yes.
was saying that you can't. I actually don't know, Jack. That's why I really was asking, because somebody was saying it's not possible to become more spiritual.
I would agree.
Yeah.
So you would agree?
Well, to imagine that we can get more spiritual is to imagine the infinite is limited by our thinking. Here again, we're back to thinking about spirituality as something that's up to our thinking to grow.
Bingo.
What's growing is our willingness to be aware of an awareness that we've always had. And what's not growing, when we're beginning to dispel the rumors of the obsessive thinking we're doing, we're also eliminating the thing that seemed to be blocking spirituality and reality. And spirituality and reality were never blocked. Only our thinking was seemingly blocked. We created the impression it was blocked so we could give thinking credit for blocking reality. If we can block reality, we're the creators of reality. It isn't a gift, it's something we're making up. Again, we've been in this loop so long, we have a lot of cultural ideas that are not true and inaccurate. Now, can I express more spirituality? Yes. Compared to the depreciated capacity I've had by maintaining ideas that are untrue, I'm not expressing reality. I'm expressing a sick concept of reality that's based in insanity. So my functional expressions aren't functional at all. They're dysfunctional. They're hurting people. They're depriving people of capacity and substance. So talking about it helps to look at it in ways that if something's infinite, we can't have any effect on it whatsoever. And nor does it have any cause, because cause starts. This isn't something that ever started or ended. You're talking about something that seems so vast and so incredible that we can't even think about it. When you start thinking about it, you begin to realize there's very few obsessive thoughts that you're maintaining in the vastness of the capacity of starting to expand our thinking. And realize that it isn't expansion, it's admitting the present awareness is with us here now. It isn't at some point in time, it's infinitely new, always where we are, always where we've been, always the essence of essence and who we are. Not individually, collectively, which is why talking about it collectively, in my experience, is going to make a difference with how people start seeing what they're doing, rather than continue to perpetuate the stories about what we're doing is the only thing we can do, and we can just expect things to get worse. And if you look at addiction now and suicide, we're witnessing that happen. There's not a lot of new thinking. It's old thinking being reapplied and reapplied and reapplied while the problem gets older. Any doctor that treated a patient that way would lose his license or be thrown in jail. Yet we're doing it socially on a mass scale and think it's normal. And it's all we can do, because that's the best these people are coming up with. And yet we are the people in the majority not participating in the conversation to help people see what's actually going on, rather than what we make believe is going on. I'm anticipating another wow, Linces.
Wow.
Yes, it's yes.
Apparently
Mhm.
everything.
But Linces, do you notice
Mhm.
when some of these thoughts are posed, it's sort of, there's almost a not knowing what to do, right?
Mhm.
Do you experience that?
Mhm.
So my experience is, and I'm going to give you some credit here because a lot of this sounds like discredit, but I'm going to give you credit. You can't have that awareness if you didn't know better. You wouldn't have that pause where all of a sudden the thoughts that you would normally engage with, you'd throw them in drive or press the accelerator immediately to get that thought out and defend that thought and reaffirm that thought and qualify it and try to explain it and express. All of a sudden that goes away. And your awareness is intact. And that's the awareness that has you sit still for a moment. I can see your face kind of melt a little bit. It just all
It's wow.
but there's a calmness to it, and there's not a lot of animation. It's just a moment of reflection, literally. That's what we are. Thoughts are reflections of our intention as beings. We see them when we're asked, we've been given a body. It's like being given a 747. You say, God, I get this great plane. Let's take it up in the air. I've never flown it, but I'm sure I can do it. We've been given bodies. We have not been good at developing the capacity to express our knowing nature through our bodies. We've been failing to a large degree. And we've been minimizing our capacity. That knowing awareness, when I watch your face, I see that you're starting to contemplate and say, wow, there's something going on here. And there's a knowing to that wowness because there's an awareness. That's your knowing nature.
I like to process everything. So I need to take a moment.
It's
to
habitual.
process everything.
It's habitual that we think we need to come to terms with it in thinking. And you'll start noticing that there are no terms to come to in that knowing nature that's allowing you to pause. You're going to start giving it more credit in your thinking, and then your thinking's going to naturally align with it because that's where all the knowledge your thinking needs to know is. It's not thinking about more thinking that your thinking needs because it has never provided any knowledge because you've already known everything, simply haven't been expressing it in your thinking. It's coming to terms with who we are as human beings. We're being human, as Gabe pointed out.
Mm-hmm.
So we're starting to express our spiritual nature in humanity.
Wow.
Say it hasn't been there. We just haven't been expressing it.
Mm-hmm.
Just like somebody who doesn't run generally can't run a mile very quickly. If you practice, exercise, you get better at it. This is an exercise. And it's not a ritual. It's just a potential to notice that everything that's happening is always happening in the present. We are always in the present. There is no past or future that we can be in, but we can think about memories and we can imagine in our brain a future. We're not incapable of that because they don't actually exist outside our brain. But like lies, they have no basis in anything other than what we think. Because when the future happens, it's in the present. And when the past happened, it was present. And when we happen at all, when we do anything, including have a single thought, we have to be present. There's no option to that because the only place anything ever happens is in the present. So everything right now, everywhere that anything is happening, including everything that isn't happening that exists, which would be fundamental to all the things happening to happen, are here now with all of us. So we share that, Anthony. There's no lack in that.
Yeah, I like what you said. I love your show so much, especially when you personalize it like that. It all comes together. But how about the fact there's so many interesting things that you're saying right now? Just incredible. It's like, wow. One of them, a couple. What do you think is the most interesting part of this, Jack, for you?
You.
God, this is the best show I've ever seen. Because it could be called, yeah, I need a show about me.
You know, Anthony, I was a drug addict. I was an alcoholic. I used
Was or are? You said
well,
that
I am, but I acted on those things for many years, thinking I would find a panacea. I always knew better. I just didn't act better.
Right.
And as I've gotten sober,
And then also too, just to be on your track, you said, "Oh, whenever I hear now, always you always knew better," right? That's not always true.
no, that's absolutely always true. If there's an absolute knowing nature, we all know better always.
Yeah.
We just don't think we do.
I for a moment I forgot what I loved about what you said, and I just remembered it. It's that if you can even have a thought you don't like, that shows that you're already ahead of the game, right? Just the fact that you can have that thought is an amazing process.
Well, it confirms your existence.
Yeah, it's like, okay,
you don't have
bring
to
it
like
on.
it.
Not
to
only are you
notice-
bothered, you're not bothering me now. You're confirming my existence. I've turned a bad thought, and I'm not relying on that, because usually I'd always come to the show to Jack. I've got to figure it out, right? He goes, Anthony, the trick is not having to figure it out. When it doesn't even matter, you're not playing the game. That's when you know you're winning.
Well,
When you're not playing.
It isn't even a trick. And I obviously don't use all the proper words, and I want to get better at that and speak more
It's
accurately.
like putting drops in your eye, kind of, just for the listeners. It's like if you all of a sudden, it's not that your vision gets clear, but your eyes become clear.
So to answer your question,
It's like putting sunglasses on.
We're basically at the end of our 2+ hours at this point, and I want to answer your question, Anthony. Inspiration is the nature of vitality and the adventure of this experience we're having. Inspiration, because it's, to your point, Lensis, it's spiritual. It's the expression of that. Inspiration is spiritus, which is spirit, in spirit. It's beginning to express that. There's no greater confirmation of existence than operating on that basis. And it's very fulfilling.
Wait, is that true too? I just heard you I love when you make a statement. There's nothing greater than that. That's it.
Well, if it's absolute, there can't be anything greater, nor can there be anything less. It's starting to concede that these terms aren't jokes. They're not words that are referencing something they're not referencing. And we've spent thousands of years developing conversations about stuff to make it like unconditional love. When was love ever conditioned? It's never been conditioned.
Yeah.
Humans have conditioned it, and I would say that wasn't love. That was enslavement. That was a contract. That was an obligation.
Good point.
See you, Mark. We've bastardized, literally taken out the totality of the duality and made believe one could be true and the other isn't, because we've manufactured ways of talking about it and thinking about it that aren't true.
Totality of the duality. That's trademarked.
Get on it.
No, I like what you said. Now, every time I'm not happy with the thought, it's really a confirming. That's a great thing that's happening.
Well, and you begin to realize that you couldn't do that. You can't think about death.
Yeah.
Live.
Yeah. That's the fourth. That's what I want to say. It's like seeing the fourth window in your thoughts,
Yeah. So the job is, if there is a job here,
Right.
The effort is to start noticing that we have a greater, if we talk about it at all.
Or how about not noticing? My point is, the trick is, every time I'd come up with a trick, you'd say you don't need a trick, like not having to notice, not having to worry about it, right? It's not so the game is on the line,
I'm not saying you have to do it.
No, I mean, it's great when you're not doing it at all. I mean, the beauty, you're so good at it where it's just free flowing. It's happening and you're not even thinking about it, right? It's second nature.
Well, it wouldn't be second nature if it's natural. It would be nature. But Anthony,
I love you.
the issue we're struggling with is a human issue.
Yeah.
And the issue the planet's struggling with is a human issue. It's not a natural issue.
Wow, that's
because of the poison and the corruption and all that. We're talking.
That's the twist too. That's the twist. The Earth is worried about a human problem. It shouldn't have.
No, it isn't worried. It isn't worried at all. And you know what? If we stop doing the thing that's wrong, it would heal itself because it knows what to do. It is not worried. It knows exactly what to do.
It's suffering, but not worrying. It just so you suffer.
Well, we're suffering as a result of minimizing its capacity to produce abundance for us.
Yeah.
We're at risk.
So it's the thought. It's not the thing I'm thinking about. It's not that I want another Ferrari. It's the beauty is the thought that you would want, that you could even question that.
Again, if you want to try to limit it to a thought to think you finally got it.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
You don't have it. So
thought is going to be the answer.
Now, the essence of essence is already the answer because it's not in question. It's not even an answer. It can't be a
I
solution.
love it. But this
Not a
is where my
problem.
dad goes, this guy, he's a genius. He's a genius. I just don't understand.
No, it's Anthony, it's so simple and so obvious when and as you start looking, which is why I suggest when you're noticing things, you'll notice that you've known them. You have a sneaky suspicion that you've known this for a long time and haven't been thinking you did.
You're
And
up
it
to
starts
something.
to reveal how clever we can be by thinking things that aren't even clever are clever, by making believe what's happening isn't happening and what is happening shouldn't be happening. And if
Yeah.
something
And you
else
can
is
do it in your
happening,
sleep. You're so good at it. You can even do it in your sleep, literally.
well, that's why we dream.
Yeah. You can do it in your sleep.
All right, so we're going to wrap this up. And I appreciate the conversation enormously. And I have great faith because I've watched what's happened in many lives, that this conversation, rooted in many conversations that have come well before any of us were born, that we're the inheritors of this conversation. We're the recipients of this. We're the potential benefactors of all of that seeming history, to be able to
Do you
look at
think-
things.
Sorry to interrupt you, and I appreciate everything you've done today. But what do you think? It just came to my mind. What if the struggle is the manipulation? As you've got your co-conspirators, you've got this thing
Of
that
course
you're
it is.
It's the trying to manipulate the beach ball again, trying to keep it. Yeah, it's trying to manipulate.
Anthony, you're having an awareness here. You're starting to notice things.
Well, just coincidentally on TV, this guy.
No. This isn't coincidental.
You're trying to manipulate.
Do you know what coincidence is? A coincidence, meaning it's simultaneously.
Is it possible there could be more than that? Is there something that's bigger than a coincidence, like a multi-incidence?
Anthony, is it possible you could sit still during a single moment and just simply look at what's happening before you escape into some other launch of questions that you want to try to make believe?
Is that wrong?
No, it's not wrong. I just don't know it's as productive. And my concept in having this conversation is to look at things and start noticing them so we can begin to become aware of them as we go through the other 166 hours of our week, rather than just 2 hours, and think that this is offering you something you don't otherwise have, so that you can begin to walk through the day and start to notice that you're always noticing things, and you're also quick to dismiss, deny, override, manipulate, try to talk your way out of those things while they're absolutely happening and you're fully aware of them. And all of that deceptive thinking has been manufactured by humans because we're capable of thinking about our thinking. We've used it as we've turned one of our greatest assets, perhaps our greatest asset, to imagine and to create and to innovate, into a major liability that's causing untold harm to people right now that we don't even think of because we've never seen them. And if we did and we're watching it, it would turn our stomachs to know that we're participating in that right now by being half-assed in any way, by being irresponsible in any way, or trying to be irresponsible in any way. It's sickening because the thinking is sick. And if we participate in that, we participate in all of it. And I mention that not to depress you, but if it does, I hope it gets your attention to notice that this isn't a joke, until we start realizing that we've taken a joke so seriously as to make believe doing the wrong thing is the only thing we can do. There is a lot going on that could be healed, that is getting worse. And I would say it's worth talking about and noticing and being as accurate as we can in the thinking we're doing in relation to it, rather than trying to come up with all the excuses we can muster to continue to unravel it and call it into question so we can remain in doubt and uncertainty. There's plenty to be certain about right now. Like I would say everything and everything and nothing combined in terms of reality and truth, being the essence of the infinite, the essence of reality, the essence of what's absolute, unlimited, omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent. Starting to see this is not, we've been thinking we're the creators of all that stuff. And our thinking is dependent on it, when in fact, we are completely 100% dependent on reality and truth and what's infinite. If it didn't exist, we wouldn't exist. The fact that it exists, we exist. The fact we exist, it exists. There's a confirmation in all that if you begin to look at it that way. And it seems to be unconfirmed when we go off on these mental crusades where we're so wrapped in the thinking that we think more of that same thinking is going to somehow solve the problem. It creates loopiness because it's circular and never ends. It just goes around and around and around and around. That's why people say what comes around goes around. Love you guys. And
Love
gals.
you. Aloha.
Thank you, Jack.
Jackie, good to see you poke in here for a minute.
Jackie the Kind.
Thanks, Jack.
You got it, Gabe.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.